figure out how to benefit the United States of America from this de-dollarization threat, using sanctions so callously is going to
Can I ask you a
alienate us
question?
in the global South. Go
So
ahead.
if you'd like hold to the position that sanctions alienize us from the global south, we should rather be like trying to achieve diplomatic behaviors, attitudes, and talks with other countries to resolve conflict, etc. Would you hold the same like energy towards Trump's tariffs? Because in the same way that a sanction can be an unnecessary regulation on the global market that could lead to certain inefficiencies, such as in this case
I
inflation.
love your question. I'm going to answer your question.
Go for it.
My hope is that the tariffs don't actually come through and that the threat of tariffs bring all of the parties to the table. And that is why I love President Trump, because in the art of the deal, President Trump, businessman Trump talked about how to use scare tactics to get people to the negotiating table. And I'm very optimistic, for example, with respect to India's ridiculous tariffs they put on US goods, the
Oh
threat
yeah.
of tariffs on India will bring them to the negotiating table. That's why Trump is right on this.
Yeah, I think a
Yeah,
lot
and
You
of
voted.
let me
Wait, wait,
just
wait. You voted for
let me
him though. Like his entire campaign, from an economic standpoint, was run on tariffs. So how can you say like, yeah,
okay.
I hope Donald Trump backs down on his key
So
promise, but I voted for him
Okay,
no,
anyway?
okay.
no,
Here's here's the thing, right? So
Riyadh, Nick, he said he couldn't hear anybody.
uh, okay. So here's one of the things. A lot of countries actually have not sanctions, tariffs on a lot of U.S. products. So and especially if you look at China, for example, they don't allow a lot of U.S. technology in. They don't allow a lot of U.S. products in. If they do, they basically strangle them with regulation and promote their own products. So I think Trump's more using the tariff talk partly to keep some manufacturing jobs in the U.S., partly to bring some into the U.S., and partly to negotiate with.
Well, I mean, Trump's record on that is pretty shitty because he outsourced more jobs in his first term than Obama did in his second term. So if we're comparing them on an equal time frame, Donald Trump had more jobs leave the United States. So clearly, his whole because he tried tariffs in his first term as well, they weren't successful. We got into a trade war with China. Farmers took the butt of that.
Yep.
So if that's his whole policy, then
Well,
goddamn, we're going to fail again, and we're going to go back into this terrible
I think
cycle.
The deal with China was actually the deal that he signed in China at the end was actually a very, very good deal. The problem was in the deal there was an exception, which in case of global events that were unforeseen, it would basically invalidate the deal. But I think overall he did a very good job with the deal he signed with China. But
If I
that
can
was
just
the problem was that was signed just before
Hey
COVID.
Dean, let me just sign off, and then you guys can have at it with Nick here. Just keep in mind the same logic that they want to apply to Trump's tariffs, that it's going to raise prices. They don't apply that same logic when they want to raise taxes, even though the same logic applies, and actually probably even worse with the taxes. So let's just keep our logic consistently here.
Do you want me to
And
respond to that? 'Cause I can.
it's probably worth mentioning too that I agree it's a negotiation tactic. We'll see what actually happens with it. Trump is a successful businessman. It's a negotiating tactic that he's engaging in, just to bring people to the table and actually try to get deals that benefit our country. And really, if you lower the corporate tax rate, you might start bringing some of these manufacturing jobs back. We need to lower the corporate tax rate,
Again,
not
that
raise it.
didn't
That's
work.
what's
That
forcing it
didn't
out.
work under Donald
Yeah.
Trump. He lowered the
Yeah.
corporate tax rate, and more
We're talking.
jobs went
Hold on a
overseas
second.
under
Hold on
him.
a second. Hold on a second. This is a long time issue. Republicans and Democrats have screwed this country for
Oh,
years on this issue.
okay.
This
So
has
we
been
just
a.
have to take some short-term pain for a lot of people, and or for long-term gain that's not even guaranteed,
Yeah,
and
and
not
then
even like
also
backed
You
up by
know,
any
So
some.
data.
it's also
Hold on a second. You
go
have to
ahead.
understand. American cities used to be a bastion of production. All those manufacturing facilities are gone. They're overseas now. That was all because of policy that came out of DC, and specifically corporate tax rates. So if you bring these jobs back, these are middle class jobs where a guy could work
Wait,
for 20, 30 years and own
hold
a
on.
home and a car and send his kids to college and live in the city. He might not be rich, but he can afford a lifestyle for his
But,
family and take a vacation every year. This is killing the middle class. Let me just
but
say
wait, wait,
this,
wait,
and you
wait.
guys can have it out.
if okay, well, Owen leaves. If that's your viewpoint that like American cities are now failing and manufacturing is going overseas, then I don't know why you wouldn't be more of a fan of Joe Biden, who signed in the CHIPS Act. Right now, we account for 0% of the world's chips. By 2030, it's projected that we'll account for 20% of all chips manufactured around the world.
Hold on,
That is
wait,
quite
wait,
literally
wait,
bringing
wait, 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 wait,
manufacturing
wait.
jobs here in the
Hold
United
on, wait,
States.
wait, wait, wait.
Okay,
The
well,
U.S.
that
does
was
not.
actually a
Hold on,
Trump.
hold on, hold on, hold on.
It was not a Trump policy. It's
Hold on, wait.
nonsense.
The U.S. does not account for 0% of the world's chips. It has companies like Global Foundries, which actually do make chips.
Well, it's gone up in recent years because of the CHIPS Act.
And then
But yes,
out
we
of
account for a bare.
Well, the
Sorry, go ahead.
chip. To be
I
fair,
just wanted to.
the Chips Act hasn't really contributed that significantly. The TSMC.
That's completely
No,
false. If you look at
No.
TSMC was.
no, if you
Hold
you
on,
can look at you
hold
can
on,
look at.
hold on.
Oh God.
This is our expertise. So if you look at companies like Intel, who have been doing a very terrible job throughout the years, yes, they're relying on money from the CHIPS Act. They're the biggest recipient of the CHIPS Act. But a company like TSMC, which is, I think, the only company that actually matters here, they started negotiations under Trump, and they've been starting the process under Trump. But yes, they have received funding from the CHIPS Act to kind of cover some of the expenses.
Look, I'm going to put some graphs in the chat. This is directly from treasury.gov. I don't know how it works to put it up on the big screen. But look, I just put it in. This is from treasury.gov directly. You can see the source at the bottom.
Yeah, and then also I just wanted
This
to
is
add on here to what Owen had said. So he said, well, if you think that tariffs will cause inflation, you got to hold that same energy towards raising taxes, such as the corporate tax rate. And the response is pretty simple, man. So yeah, raising the corporate tax rate has an inflationary pressure. No one's denying that. However, in a functioning economy, there's good inflationary pressures, there's bad inflationary pressures, there's good disinflationary pressures, and there's bad disinflationary pressures. And I believe that increasing the corporate tax rate by 7% with the end goal of being able to provide tax cuts towards 100 million American workers in that low and the middle class while not adding a dime to the debt or deficit over 10 years is ultimately a good thing. But I don't want to detract from the conversation about the
So that might work, and then the U.S. consumer pays the price every time, and it's been going that way for decades. This is a decades-old problem, and again, this is a real-world thing. This isn't a political thing. You can go to any major city, and you will find districts that used to be manufacturing hubs. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. It's where I grew up. There are whole districts that used to be manufacturing facilities. Now they're just worn-down buildings. They don't do anything because of the high corporate tax rate, and that's where China screws us. That's where they take our lunch money and then buy their own lunch with it. And it's been bad for this country. We have to bring these jobs back. They're middle class jobs, and they're good for the country. I'll get out of the way here. I can hear Fuentes scheming right now. I can hear him laughing and scheming as he's priming to you guys are going to take aim at him. But I just want to say, Adrian, thanks for having.
Okay.
Yeah, nice having you, Owen.
Yeah, nice having you.
Adrian, thanks for having it.
Yeah.
Good. I shake hands. I shake hands with my opponent. So good for you, Dean.
right.
Good for you, Harry. And enjoy.
I actually have a
Alright.
question
I would like-
for Nick.
Can I just say?
Actually, before that, Nick, please no history lesson.
Can
we're not
I
gonna
just say
do-
real
we're
quick?
not gonna
Can
do
I just say
Vladimir Putin.
goodbye real quick?
Yeah,
Is
sure,
that
sure.
okay? No, thank you so much for having me. I think it's
Yeah,
this
thank you for coming.
great dialogue, and I think it's a great conversation. And Dean and Harry, I think once you get out, kind of like into the real world, and you're, out of college and really feeling the effects, and you have a family of your own, your views might change, maybe not. But I think that will be a big difference for you. I'll get off and not be a speaker. And I find Nick to be entertaining. Nick knows I absolutely love him, so I will continue to listen.
Okay,
Jesus
well,
Christ.
Kimberly,
All right, Kimberly, we should debate further in the future, though. I think we'd have a good conversation.
yeah,
come around
Kimberly, I
anytime.
appreciate
Sounds
you.
good.
I
So,
appreciate you for your respect.
Yeah, likewise.
Harry,
Yeah.
Dean, before we get started with Nick, would you guys support a system similar to?
See, Adrian, this is what I'm talking about. We're finally getting Democrats and Republicans to sit down and actually talk.
Right.
Yes, there might be some
Yeah.
screaming. The first day or two, you're gonna have to, get all your fighting out. You're gonna have to throw your tantrum, and then hopefully by tomorrow, the solutions start coming the fuck out.
Yeah,
All right,
cool.
so
Well, I hope that Nick Fuentes and that guy Owen don't represent the Republicans that we
He
should be sitting
doesn't.
down with because
Alright.
Nick
Yeah.
Fuentes does not represent.
Well,
the
I-
Republicans.
Alright.
think
I
everybody
agree. I
represents
totally-
their own
I-
interests here. This is how
so-
it works. Anyways,
so hold
and I
on.
also
I
agree.
love Owen.
Okay,
I
no,
love
go
Owen.
ahead. Out.
Alright, so
Yeah,
would you guys
okay.
support a system similar to a country like Sweden's, where they basically have low regulations on companies, low taxes on companies, but the tax rate for people is high.
Like a democrat model. I'm not, so I'm like somewhat familiar with like the social democrat models of Nordic countries. I'd say I'm not familiar enough to argue that they're like good, but like my C means tell me that they're all right. But I'd have to, investigate a little more.
Yeah, I think I make the same argument that so far I haven't seen anything to suggest that their system is better, but like it's just not something I've studied extensively.
Okay.
Now, I wanted to wrap this back into a conversation we were having on tariffs a bit ago. So I had a conversation with Nick month and a half back, and Nick actually held to the position that flat tariffs on all goods imported into the country will not cause inflation for the American consumer. I know there's other Republicans up here that have actually argued the opposite of that, such as UTSAV. I don't want to butcher the pronunciation of your name, so I'm just going to spell it. So, Nick, do you still defend that position?
First of all, hey, can you hear me, by the way? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can all hear you.
Yeah, we hear you. Welcome.
Hey, what's up? Hey, what's going on, everybody? Good to be with you. So the tariff debate, no, I said that they can increase prices. I said that, and if you look at Trump's first term, inflation was low, and you're right, it wasn't across the board tariffs. It was selective tariffs on countries like China. And regardless of that, prices did not go up considerably. Inflation didn't go up considerably. And that's really kind of the operative word, because whenever you're talking about economics, it always involves trade-offs, whether we're talking about corporate tax rate, tariffs, even immigration policy. It's always a trade-off. And so the question is, what is it that the country is after? And, you asked a question earlier about should we trade off, for example, the short-term benefit for a long-term gain, or rather a short-term pain in exchange for a long-term benefit. And I think those are really the more interesting questions. And so, for example, something like tariffs, yeah, they can increase prices, but I think ultimately, one, I don't think it's considerable. And two, I think it's worth it in the long run, because the whole point of tariffs is about what the country produces. It's better for the country, for the United States, to produce things like semiconductors, for example, than it is for the country to produce oil. One of our biggest exports is just oil, just raw materials. It's better to make things. It's better to make and export finished products. It makes the country richer. And so you compare, for example, the United States and China, and this is something that people were looking at during the war in Ukraine. One way to look at the economy is GDP. You add up all the production in the country over the year and look at the value of that, and you can compare it that way. And I think that's actually moot, because there are different exchange rates with the currencies. And so, the purchasing power of a country like China is different than the United States. But another way to look at how you measure the size or the health of the economy is the size of its different sectors. And so during the Ukraine war, it became actually a very important question of who can produce more things, who can make more things in factories. And so when you look at a country like China, for example, it's like 70% of their economy is productive, meaning that when you add up construction, agriculture, and manufacturing, that's 70% of their economy. When you look at the United States, you add up manufacturing, construction, agriculture, that's 15% of our economy. So China's GDP might be smaller than ours, but when you compare it relative to what is actually being produced, they're actually making more than we are.
Nick, can you compare the GDP growth of China compared to our own country in the last 4 years and tell me what you see?
Oh, since the COVID pandemic? Yeah, and I agree with you. China slowed down considerably since the pandemic.
Also important to note, a lot of China's construction is complete bullshit that's just been there to prop up the economy.
Yeah, now they're like,
yeah, but see, but here's the thing. Here's what you got to understand. The ability to produce is what matters. China has the ability, for example, to produce warships at a much faster rate than we are, 20 times the rate that we can. China has way more shipbuilding yards than the United States had. We used to have dozens. Now I think we have 3 shipyards. We actually build ships. Now we're having to rely on countries like Korea, other countries to build the ships. Obviously, when we're getting into like a great power confrontation and like the international order is being tested by these other powers, that kind of capacity once again becomes relevant. How many ships you could build, tanks, ammunition, missiles, things like that. Russia, China, these other countries have much more manufacturing capability. Anyway, so all this is to say, the benefit of tariffs is about making the right kinds of things, and that's worth actually the short-term pain. In the long run, again, and I'll admit that it increases prices. I don't think it increases prices significantly, but whatever the cost is, I think it's worth it because we want to make the right kinds of things. That's the real wealth of nations, is what the country makes. And I don't think we should be a petrostate that's exporting like debt and financial services and oil. That's going to make us poor in the
Yeah,
long
I
run.
think
And it also, more importantly, makes us weak.
I
So
think
Nick, there's one.
during COVID, you saw that during COVID, where there was like only one company in the entirety of the U.S. that was producing masks because all the
It's Chinese.
yeah, no, I'm talking about in the U.S. No, the rest of
Oh yeah, it was
the
based in
yeah,
Texas,
the
right? They
yeah,
made a
yeah,
shit ton of money, but then they had
yeah.
to shut down because it's seasonal more
Yeah.
or less. They
Well,
can't be
the
producing at that
problem
rate, and they
was
realized they would go
the
bankrupt.
problem was that during COVID, they found out what we found out was that all of the masks were being made in China, and no one was buying from the American companies because China was subsidizing the mask companies, and so this American manufacturer was really struggling, and only when did China put restrictions on all the equipment because of COVID did they realize that they actually needed to buy from a U.S. supplier.
3 or 4 things about what Nick said that I'd like to respond to. The first thing that, well, when Trump imposed his tariffs during his first term, we didn't see any great increases in the macro inflation rate. First of all, using the macro rate of inflation as an indicator on if his tariffs were inflationary or not is a really terrible idea. Because something else that we saw introduced around the same time as his tariffs was his tax cuts. We can all agree, as long as we have a little bit of a background in economics, that tax cuts are inflationary. I mean, that's a natural byproduct. You could still make the argument that they're good. That's fine, but they're inflationary. They have inflationary pressures. Yet after the introduction of the TCJA, we still saw a decrease in that macro level of inflation. So in other words, tariffs can have inflationary pressures while not being resembled within the macro rate of inflation, and that would be described via the fact that those were isolated tariffs, as you had pointed out, Nick. Second of all, you said that you don't believe the tariffs that he wants to impose in his second administration will be considerable. So, I mean, first of all, the term considerable is going to be incredibly subjective. You get to define that however you want. What's considerable to you may not be considerable to me or Elon Musk, right? But overwhelmingly, we do have expert indications, such as the idea that the 25% flat rate tariff that he wants to impose on Canada will increase the price of a gas. I think that and at the end of the day, if the point of his tariffs is to reindustrialize America, well, then they would have to increase the price of goods from other to do it to such an insane to reindustrialize America as you're describing. And then for my third and final point here, you pointed out a difference between us and China that kind of sets China on a little bit of an upper leg. You said their productive capacity. I define that as their infrastructure. The reason why China can build more warships, etc., than the U.S. is because they have the infrastructure to do that. You describe this as their shipbuilding yards. And I think that we could cut to the chase and resolve the problem of a lack of infrastructure in the US without causing these negative consequences to the American consumer through the use of investment of raw capital. Trump did it with a farm bill. Biden and Harris did it with the CHIPS and the Science Act. We can all agree that if we just invest money into building out our infrastructure for manufacturing from our federal government, A, that's a pretty damn good way to spend our money, and B, it achieves the same end goal that tariffs do without causing those same negative consequences, such as inflation for the consumer or a reduction in our own exports that cripples American companies that are predominantly reliant on exports, such as Trump's tariffs in 2018 did.
That was like a German tank is worth 4 American tanks, but the Americans always had 5. Referring to
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's about their productive capacity. That the Germans had higher quality stuff, but we had a bigger industrial base, and that's really the operative word is industrial base. And this just goes to show, Dean, in your Chat GPT answer that, unfortunately, people don't have actually a real understanding of what economics is.
1 second.
Economics is not,
Sitting in the garage without a
pardon
laptop.
me? Okay, can I finish my answer or do you get your 3-part and then interruptions on mine? So here's the problem. When we look at economics now, people talk about gross domestic product, people talk about dollars, but dollars is a fiction. That is a fiat currency. The value is always changing. What economics really is about is goods and services, factors of production, labor, raw materials, capital. This is what an economy really is. China has a bigger real economy because they have the capability to make more things. They have a bigger labor force, they have immense raw materials, and they have a huge industrial base. Industrial base meaning they can make things. And so you say, for example, well, we could solve this deficit in shipbuilding capacity with basically, you say something like a subsidy. Why don't we just get the government to fund more shipyards? And it's like, but what does that mean? The government can print money. The government cannot print shipyards. Would you like to know why? Because shipyards are built using steel. They are built using labor, skilled labor, materials that are sourced from the United States. If the United States doesn't have a large industrial base, it is not economical to build shipyards and ships. If the United States does not have a large skilled labor force, it cannot hire them economically at a shipyard. The way that you build a large industrial base is by exporting industrial goods, finished products, manufactured goods. If your goods are not competitive in the world market, then you cannot sell them there, and then therefore you cannot make them. So, what makes it economical to have an industrial base are tariffs, which protect American industry and protect American workers from foreign competition, whether that's because of vast, cheap labor or manipulation of currency. And so that's why you need a whole of government approach or a broad approach in the economy to foster and cultivate industry. That's the whole point. So,
The funny
and the
thing
point
is,
is this: if we
go ahead.
can agree that it is desirable for the United States to make things, if we can agree it's desirable for the United States to be powerful and have an industrial base, well, then it's a necessity. And so yeah, like things will probably be more expensive. And you say, well, the word considerable is doing a lot of heavy lifting. That's very subjective. True. But I said it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because what is imperative for the United States to maintain primacy and project strength is a strong industrial base, because
I hear you.
power and economics, the problem with you
Do you mind if
guys
I
is it's
respond
like
real
the
quick?
chat.
Hold on.
Yeah, hang on. Let me just say this, then you can respond. The problem with you kids, you youngsters, nephew, is it's these Chat GPT answers. You're racing. You're not even listening to what I'm saying. You're just
I am.
ready to launch in with the next talking point.
Nick, don't worry. I'm
And
on
this
a
is
very
why,
real note.
because you never read
You still got
Friedrich
more to say.
List, okay? Because you don't know about the American system. But go ahead, give me the Chat GPT Biden
Okay,
talking points on that. Let's hear it.
Before that, I have a question. So based on what I've just seen, not just, but based on what I've seen from you, I think I think you're somewhat anti-immigration. So
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about that too.
hold on, wait. So as someone that's worked in manufacturing, Adrian, or has also worked in manufacturing,
Mhm.
I know that you can't just say, let's start manufacturing this thing and be competitive on a worldwide scale. You